Assalamualaikum. This is lecture 25 for web design and development, and in this lecture we are going to discuss about one of the fundamental aspects of web design and development, which is authentication and authorization. So here are the lecture contents. In this lecture I am going to discuss about the difference between authentication and authorization, and there will be some middleware and guards to restrict number of users or unauthenticated users to access a certain part of your application. So authentication means verifying a user that the user is existing and allowing them to act as that person in your system. This includes login and logout processes and tools that allow users to identify themselves during their time using the application. If the user is valid, that means it has the username and password to log into your system. That means the user is an authenticated system. On the other hand, authorization means determining whether an current or authenticated user is allowed or authorized to perform specific behavior. For example, an authorization system allows you to forbid any non-administrators from viewing the other user accounts. So the user model is a bit more complex than simple model used earlier in the bank application app. The model implements a number of contracts or interfaces such as unauthenticatable, authorizable, and can reset passwords. The common method is the auth method, and which is quite convenient to work with the user attributes. So if you look at the user migration into database/migration folder, there will be a migration for the users. So setting up the user authentication, including registration, login, sessions, passwords, resets, and access permission is one of the trivial tasks in each application. So if you run this user migration, the user model will also be migrated to database consisting of the following migration files. So there will be ID for each user, there will be name, email which will be unique for each user, there will be a email verified field, that means you only allow access to verified users. So you can use a verified trait to allow access to the users who are only verified. So at this point it is nullable that if the user is not verified, it can also access the your application. Then there will be password, and there is a remember token which you have seen in number of applications, that if you check the number remember token, the next time you log into that or visit to that application, the application remembers your login details, and there will be timestamp to record whether when you created the last your account or when you actually modified your account or any other data in your application. So as we discussed, the auth method is very useful. The auth namespace is already created with the application containing models for the users, controllers, and views. However, it is not operational yet. So you can make it operational with the one command which we'll discuss shortly. So it provides 5 basic controllers to handle the common user management function. So if you go to the app controller http/controller method, you will see a user namespace or auth namespace which will have these controllers. The register controller which will manage all the registrations for the new users. The login controller will manage the login information whenever the user logins to your system. The reset password controller is applicable when user has created an account or logged into the system and resets his password. The forgot password controller is used when the user does not remember his password details, and the verify email controller is used when you ask the user to verify their email to use your application. So let's look at each briefly. The registration controller, along with the register users trait, contain the logic how new users are created, how registration input is validated, and where they are directed. So the common way is to create a user and log in it to the system and direct it to home page. The register user trait handles the few functions that are helpful to create new user. So it shows the registration form view. However, if you need to register user with a custom view, you can replace the view by overriding the show registration form into the controller. It handles the post of the registration with the register function. This passes the input to the validator method and then to create method into the database. Finally, a redirect path method handles the redirection of the user to the specific page upon successful creation. The login and the reset controllers are discussed here. The controller allows the user to log in, implementing authenticates user trait. This trait is responsible for using a login form, validating logins, throttling failed login attempts that you restrict the user to number of login attempts in a specified time. Usually it is set to 3 or 5 attempts in an hour. Handling logouts and redirects user the requests or login are handled as register controller for showing form, post, and redirect. The throttle login limits is any combination of the username and IP address to 5 attempts in 60 seconds from any IP. The reset password controller manages the password resets being sent to the email and a new password settings. The forgot password controller simply sends the password reset emails using the links to application for new password. The verification email controller implements the verify email trait for recently signed up users. So if you look at the auth routes into the uh, web.php file in the root folder, you can see one root named as auth double colon roots. So when everything is set up, auth require roots for the user management, which can be handled with auth double colon roots. To enable email verification so that only verified user can access to the application, in the roots can be modified as app auth roots and specifying verify is equal to true. Now only those users will be able to access your system which have verified their email. Similarly, you can enable or disable user registration or password reset with a simple variable. For example, you can turn off the registration is equal to false so that no user will be able to register by themselves. Or you can set reset is equal to false so that no user is able to reset their password. So it is very simple and very powerful. However, nothing is functional yet unless you scaffold the views and controllers. So you just have to run one command, that is php artisan make colon auth, to make them available for you into the application. So if you are using any version Laravel greater than 6, you can use the command into composer require laravel slash ui double hyphen dev, and then you can use php artisan ui view double colon auth. So in this case you have to download and install npm manager and npm run development. So if you are using any version which is less than Laravel 6, this command is only required. An important function logout of other devices is commented out there, which is applicable in most high profile applications such as Facebook and Google, Yahoo, etc. So you can also use this function in which allows you to log out of all devices you have logged in. Uh, However, which is commented out to authenticate session middleware, and you can use it to find out the web group in app/http/kernel.php. So the another important consideration here is the middleware which is provided into the kernel files. The middleware provides traits to be implemented on roots or controllers which can pass on to the views and models. The middleware are applied in HTTP kernel field methods using the variables such as root middleware. For example, authentication middleware specifies the user must be authenticated, and whenever you will use this middleware, only authenticated user will be able to access those roots, controllers, views, or models. Similarly, verify middleware specifies the email must be verified, and user will be only access to the pages where with the authenticated or verified email. The middleware can simply be applied to a set of routes. For example, if you look at this route, you can get a home route with a new home and only provide a middleware name authentication, so that whenever this route will be accessed by any user, if that user is authenticated, the route will be processed. Otherwise, there will be an error message specifying that your route is not accessible to your current user. Similarly, if you want to check the user authentication onto the view level, you can do it with the auth and guest attributes. So where auth and end auth specifies the area where the user is authenticated, and guest specifies the area when the user is not authenticated. So you can design a page when the user is logged in, and you can display its profile picture, username, and logout button. So in the this phase, you can specify a login and register option. So the directories can be added further guard to check the specific type of authentication on user, such as typical user is from which group. And for example, auth trainees checks the user guard on the users of trainees type. So most authentication systems are always rooted with guards. Each guard is a combination of two pieces, the driver and the provider. The driver specifies how it persists and retrieves the authentication, such as session, file, database, etc. Providers allow to get user by given criteria such as user table. So you can add a new guard in configuration slash auth.php file. For example, in an app we have users that are trainers, and we have their own users called trainees. So for example, we have specified the guard trainees and with the driver of session and provider of trainees. The following code in the boot method of auth service provider that takes each HTTP request and looks for the appropriate user, and it checks that authentication is happened via request and the token hash is used, and you have to return the user where request is used with the tokens. So just below in the configuration slash auth file auth.provider section lists the available providers. Add the following into the trainees guard. You have provided that the trainees are provided by the Eloquent driver, and the model of trainees is called app/trainees class. So you can also use custom guards. The above code specifies there are two types of user in the users and the trainee types, and they need to be authenticated separately. The application now can differentiate between authentication guard users and authentication guard trainees. Similarly, the auth route can take the parameters to put restrictions on routes for specific type of users. For example, app middleware is applied to app colon trainees, and you can group these into a number of paths, and only trainee routes will be accessible here. So this is a simple mechanism to provide the authentication, authorization and rule. The authorization primarily works on few verbs such as can, cannot and allows. Can means user can access certain parts of use, and cannot denies those rules, and allows simply allows the rules. So, for example, in one case, if an edit contact is accessed by a user, and if the gate is denied this request, you can send an abort response to the user. And if the gate does not do that, you can send the user with the contact create page. You can use app service provider, and which extends the service provider, and you can specify the boot method and specify the user ID must be a contact user ID. That means only contacts will be able to access certain paths in your application. So if you want to read more about the topic, you can read chapter 9 of the recommended book, or you can ask any question. Thank you very much.